Thanks for coming, Liz.
Great pleasure.
You've got some. Liz has got some family stuff on, and I didn't think she'd be able to make it. But thank you for it's been some week for UK Bitcoin. I discovered a couple of tweets this week. First one dating back to the January 2018. So this is way before I had bought any Bitcoin, knew what Bitcoin was. And this was you. We should welcome cryptocurrencies in a way that doesn't constrain their potential. Liberate free enterprise areas by removing regulation that restrict prosperity. Hashtag #ShakeUp. Do you remember it?
Yes, I do. Yes. That was when I was at the Treasury as Chief Secretary to the Treasury. And what I discovered in that department was a whole lot of very, very controlled thinking. So this was after Brexit. And my view was that given that we'd voted to leave the European Union, we needed to make the most of it. But what we had in the Treasury was officials who were overly cautious, who didn't want to embrace new technology, who didn't want to embrace new ideas, and in particular, didn't want to take on the Bank of England. And this was my way of speaking out and challenging them in public. Of course, that tweet got me into a lot of trouble with the Chancellor at the time and the Treasury officials, but it showed me, and my experience in that department then showed me where the power lay, but also the deep resistance of the British bureaucracy to embracing change, which I think is a huge problem in this country.
So you posted that 2018. When were you aware of cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin?
Well, actually, I first read a book by Dominic Frisby. I don't know if people have read it, called Bitcoin and the End of the State. I can't remember why I decided to read the book, but I think I'd been over to America. I'd heard people talking about crypto. I was interested in it, and I was interested in it because I felt it challenged the economic system we had. And even back then, I could see our economic system wasn't working. You know, our economy had been stagnating. There hadn't really been a recovery after the financial crisis. And I was sitting there in the Treasury thinking, what can we do to actually change the way we are as a country? So I also went over to look at what Trump was doing with things like opportunity zones, what was happening there with their deregulation agenda, because my motivation for going into politics in the first place was I want this country to be great. I think we're a great country. We've got fantastic history. Here we are in Derby, in the home of the Industrial Revolution. And I think it's incredibly sad that we're falling down the world's league tables, that the country is so risk averse, and I wanted to change it.
Yeah, it is. We're not in. I saw you did a podcast, or is it something about equating the UK GDP to Mississippi or something?
Yeah, we are now poorer than Mississippi, which is the poorest state in the US. And just to show you how bad it's got, in the year 2000, British GDP was almost the same, per capita was almost the same as the US. Now, their GDP per capita, their income per head, is 50% higher than ours. 50% higher. Can you imagine if you had 50% more in your pockets today, or we had 50% more in our economy? I mean, it's incredible. And that, to me, why has that happened? Well, our energy prices are incredibly expensive. They're 4 times what the US is. The Bank of England was made unaccountable in 1998, and we've had disastrous monetary policy, fueling inflation, fueling asset prices. We've also had just a massive growth of the state. So in the year 2000, the state was a third of our national economy. It's now almost a half of our national economy, and that squeezes private enterprise. And that is what I was talking about.
Yeah, and I think, there's so many people who have fled the UK, and I think there's Probably.
More people have fled the UK than any other country apart from China, and it's more people per capita than China have fled the UK, or billionaires in particular.
Probably been more following Wednesday as well.
Well, I think a lot of people flew in anticipation because we just had weeks and weeks of all the terrible stuff that could happen. You know, the mansion tax, the exit tax, the income tax. Every possible tax has been mooted over the last few weeks.
And for me, it's been really nice getting to know people in this room, because there are, with that, a group of people, business owners, who actually are rooted in the UK, very patriotic. I know how patriotic you are, Liz. And want to stay in their own way. Whatever small difference they can make is to make a difference. I was, however, shocked just our chat over lunch, because it's always banded around that a lot of people won't know this, that the UK apparently have 61,000 Bitcoin through seizures. And it's banded around on charts, etc. However, our ex-Prime Minister, you didn't know, did you?
No. And by the way, I bet the Chancellor doesn't know. I bet the Chancellor doesn't know that.
Incredible. Because
this is, I think it's, and I write about this in my book, 10 Years to Save the West, of which you've got a copy in the audio.
Don't worry, I was going to do that.
The audio book is out very, very soon. For those of you that can't read, you can listen. You can listen to the audio book. But the point is that in the system of government in Britain, it's the bureaucrats that control the information, they control the budget, they control who hires and fires the personnel. So it's the permanent secretary of the Treasury and it's the governor of the Bank of England that have that information. And they essentially decide whether or not they want to tell ministers about that information. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if that was not information available to ministers unless they specifically asked for it. I think it's important people understand how the British system of government actually works and who controls the money, who controls the budgets. But it is not the elected ministers.
Wow. So we often thought, because you sort of relate it to, we're sort of laughing about the Gordon Brown moment of Gordon Brown with the UK gold reserves, where I think over 3 years he sold approximately 400 tons. Now that looks like an £11 billion paper loss that if it was still on the sort of balance sheet. But yeah, last we heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, anyone from the crowd, I think we heard that the seized Bitcoin was somewhere with the Met Police. So we don't know if there's some like 12 words in some drawer next to a 1980s packet of Lambert and Butler or something. But, you know, where's the Bitcoin?
Well, it's a bit like Donald Trump trying to find out how much gold there's been in Fort Knox and doing an audit, which still hasn't happened.
Yes.
Have you noticed that?
Yeah, why is that? Another book?
Question mark.
Yeah, exactly. The second tweet this week was a really recent one of someone obviously you know well, where, you know, obviously Bitcoin has had a volatile week or so to the downside. But the last person in the UK I thought would send a post trying to G up the community saying everything's all right. When the price drops, you just get more Bitcoin, was Kwasi Kwarteng, the ex, Chancellor. How long has he been into Bitcoin?
I don't know, to be honest. I haven't talked to him about his new Bitcoin enterprise.
Yeah, because that's, he's launching something soon. But I think some of the frustration is, we talk about the UK doesn't know whether it's got, or an ex-Prime Minister didn't know 61,000 Bitcoin. You've got in the UK quite a lot of very well-briefed policy groups who were trying with the Tory party to chat and have open door policy, the Labour Party now, about, okay, if we have this or if we don't have this, what are the advantages of just being educated on this technology? However, it seems to all fall on deaf ears. Emails aren't replied to, invitations. And it's one of these things of, do you approach this from a policy perspective? Or actually, I know something you're a real fan of is ground up movements.
I think people have to understand what the problem is. The idea of Bitcoin and crypto is something that the Treasury and the Bank of England are allergic to, and the financial regulators, because what it does is it takes power out of the hands of the bureaucracy and puts it into the hands of people. And you'll see that the Bank of England and the Treasury have been promoting CBDCs.
Yes.
And what is that? That's a technology that allow the state to have more control, to see what you're spending, where you're spending it of, even stopping you spending if they don't like it. So you can see why a completely independent system is something that is an anathema to them. And as I've said, the ministers in the Treasury take direction from the Treasury officials. Now, in some cases, at some times, you can have a strong chancellor who's prepared to take them on. But I observe that's become increasingly difficult over time. What I tried to do when I was Prime Minister was to challenge the Treasury orthodoxy and the Bank of England orthodoxy. What I found is that they were prepared to leak, to brief, to lie about what I was doing in order to create trouble and create chaos. So don't underestimate that this is a fight. It's a fight with an establishment that have a very strong vested interest in stopping the success of things like cryptocurrencies. And I've just watched Joe's video this morning, which kind of explains why that is. Because, there's been a system which has printed money, created the space for more public spending. It's essentially a Ponzi scheme. And the main beneficiaries of the Ponzi scheme are the 4 million people that work for the British government. And there are 4 million of them. So if you consider there's 96 ministers with probably about 200 special advisors, and then there's 4 million people in the system, you can see the balance of power there is between those elements. So what I'm saying, Jez, is that if we want change in the country, we actually have to change the way that system works. We need different people with different incentives in the Bank of England, in the Treasury, in the government bureaucracy, because otherwise that system won't change. And the thing that particularly attracts me about Bitcoin and crypto is it's an alternative ecosystem. So a bit like the alternative media, the sort of Joe Rogans or Dan Wootons of this world provide you with information that you don't hear on the mainstream media. Bitcoin and crypto provide an alternative source of monetary power to the central bank, to the Treasury. So that's what's going on. It's not, lots of people say to me, well, don't the Treasury understand that if they put VAT on private schools, fewer people are going to go to private schools and they won't actually make any money? I said, of course they understand that. They want to close private schools down. That's why they're doing it. It's not that they don't understand it. It's that it's a threat. That's the issue.
The world is changing fast, and your business is no exception. How you save, plan, and protect your future is shifting, and standing still now means falling behind. This is the reason we are launching the UK's first Bitcoin business network, and it exists to help UK businesses protect what they've built and turn Bitcoin into a genuine competitive advantage. It's a place for founders, entrepreneurs, and executives to share what's working, learn from people actually doing it, and help drive positive change across the UK. So if you are a business owner or an entrepreneur, hit the link down below to join the network and help shape the future of Bitcoin in the UK. Okay, let's get back to the video.
Just moving, because I think what a lot of people miss is obviously you were Prime Minister, but then 2 days into being Prime Minister, you were dealt, the Queen passed away, which was a pretty,
It was an extraordinary, well, it was very sad, but it was also extraordinary after a 70-year reign.
Absolutely. But obviously you worked within politics for a long time. When you became Prime Minister, was it like, wow, the things I thought I could change, actually, I didn't realize how difficult this was going to be?
So I already knew, because I'd been a government minister for 10 years in lots of different departments, education, justice, treasury. I already knew how hard it was to get things done and how hard the system would fight against any kind of serious change. And even when I was trade secretary fighting trade deals, there was a lot of pressure against actually doing anything in Whitehall, and delay tactics and general unhelpfulness, I would say. So I knew it would be a struggle. I knew the Treasury would not like the budget I was putting forward, because fundamentally the Treasury and the Bank of England and the Office of Budget Responsibility are all Keynesians. Keynesian economics now dominates economics. They have that belief set. They also are believers in net zero, high migration, staying close to the EU, everything the sort of Davos elite believe in, the Treasury civil service. So I knew it would be a battle. I was in no doubt about that. And even getting the mini budget produced was difficult, with the level of resistance, and any official government document like a budget has to be prepared by the officials. You're not actually able to do that as a minister. You have to get them to do it. So that was a tough process, getting them to do the mini budget. What I didn't appreciate is how underhand the Bank of England would be and the Office of Budget Responsibility would be in sabotaging it. So what happened the day before we put forward the mini budget, and bear in mind the core measures in that were keeping corporation tax at 19%, not raising it to 25%, restoring duty-free shopping, in our cities, getting rid of IR35. It was a load, and getting on with fracking, restricting the welfare budget or the rise in welfare spending. It was all sensible stuff to get the economy going. There was also creating new enterprise zones that would have had less planning regulation. What I hadn't appreciated is what the Bank of England did is the night before the mini budget, they announced the sale of £40 billion worth of gilts. The first time they had announced that for years, they announced the night before. And then on the Monday, when markets started to move, it turned out that something I didn't know about at all, but the Bank of England had failed properly to regulate the pension market, and a lot of pension funds were exposed to a sudden rise in interest rates. So that created a kind of chain reaction. Subsequently, the Bank of England admitted that 2/3 of all of the market movements in October 2022 had been down to their failure to regulate LDIs. But what they actually did on the day is they briefed out that it was the fault of the mini budget. And the mainstream media picked up on that. The mainstream media are very beholden to the Bank of England. They are very, very powerful. It's interesting. If anybody tries to write an op-ed that's critical of the Bank of England, they will often find it cut from the press. The press don't want to report anti-Bank of England stories or narratives. So what I really saw, and then subsequently, the Office of Budget Responsibility leaked one of their forecasts predicting a massive black hole, which we know they do all the time. We know all their forecasts have turned out to be wrong. But the point is that they galvanized themselves, their allies in the media, and their international allies. So the IMF, the State Department, et cetera, to push back against what we were trying to do. So I think what I learnt is I already knew that they were obstructive. I knew that they didn't share my ideology. I didn't realize just how underhand they were prepared to be.
Bizarrely, I can relate to the Bank of England. I sent them a very polite reply about a year and a half ago on Twitter, and they've blocked me ever since. And it was a really polite reply about just a thought on something.
They are unwilling to be challenged. And this is what happens when you give people power without accountability. So in 1998, the Bank of England Act was passed. What it said is the governor was appointed for 5 years, and they could not be sacked apart from gross misconduct. That was then extended to 8 years. So you've got somebody in post with no accountability, no way of getting rid of them. And what I discovered is, as Prime Minister, that the governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, was actually more powerful than me, because I could be sacked. I could be sacked essentially by Tory MPs, which is what happened, whereas he could not be removed from our position. So we have created this system, and when I say we, I mean Tony Blair. We've created this system where we've got these people, like the permanent secretaries, like the governor of the Bank of England, who have more power than the elected politicians. So what I'm saying, Jez, in order to change the system, you've got to change that. You've got to make these people higher and fireable. Otherwise, they have more power than people with a democratic mandate.
Are you, and I'm certainly, I think I'm seeing it. Are you seeing now, as I know, even when Labour came in and they were constantly quoting your name and blaming you in the mini budget, I felt in the last few months the tide has changed in your favour, where people are now going, you know what, maybe she had a point. Are you feeling that?
Look, I am still being blamed right, left and centre, but I take that as a kind of backhanded compliment, because I think the powers that be see me as somebody who understands the system and poses a threat to it, because I do see what is happening and all of the things that have gone wrong, which is the debt's actually got higher, because when you raise taxes too high, businesses leave the country, people don't want to go into work, new businesses don't start. All of those things have happened, and every day there's a new headline which is unexpected rise in the deficit, or unexpected that energy prices are high, or unexpected higher inflation. I expected all of that because the policies were terrible. So that is the battle. I think certainly a lot of people I meet just going around the country say to me, I supported what you did in the budget, you did the right thing, you were shafted, whatever, they say all that stuff. The mainstream media is still not really willing to report it, and it's not willing to analyse what is the real economic problem with this country. I mean, if you look at the way that money was printed after the banking crisis and after COVID, there's no commentary on it. We just had a COVID report out yesterday. There was no comment on the economic disaster printing money was, putting people on furlough was. No comment at all. So there's just a whole load of stuff no one is talking about, which I find, very, very concerning.
We've got a few minutes left. Just, I remember Rishi Sunak once I was thinking about the amount of political people, which it surprised me back in 2008, and you mentioned it, but it's almost digital assets, Bitcoin is just a word no one will utter. The Tory party said we'll make the UK a digital asset hub. Obviously not. Labour don't talk about it. But you have had, obviously, Zia Yousaf and Nigel Farage come out with 3 or 4 points recently. And I don't know, given your sort of knowledge in this book of getting things done, and I think what they were proposing was the UK has a strategic Bitcoin reserve. There was a mention of 10% capital gains tax. We, being Bitcoiners, think it should be zero, being money. And really to try and drive it forward. Now, this might be 2029, never, whenever, if these guys get into power. Is something like this even possible with how the UK is right now?
It is not possible if you don't change the system. If you don't change the FCA, which I believe had 4,000 employees at the last count, if you don't change the Treasury, if you don't change the Bank of England, none of this stuff will happen. It's still the case that the governor is on a 8-year term. I think a new governor will be appointed in 2028. If there is an election win by a prime minister who wants to change things in 2029, they will have 7 years of the governor appointed by Keir Starmer, unless they change the law. So my message really here is the pressure needs to be on changing the law. The Constitutional Reform Act, which put the civil service code into law, needs to be repealed. The the Bank of England Act needs to be repealed. The Office of Budget Responsibility Act needs to be repealed. And people need to be elected on a manifesto, and they need to be able to implement their manifesto in government. So I think that is the biggest priority. And that will only happen, Jez, if there is a movement of people who want real change. Because ultimately, why did I not succeed in implementing my mini budget? Well, because I had all these powerful vested interests, the 4 million civil servants, the Bank of England, incredibly powerful, unaccountable and unsackable. All of these people were against what I was trying to do. And there was not really a movement of people pushing in the other direction. And I think what's happened in this country is we have an elite which is out of touch, which believes in managed decline, which runs the bureaucracy. They run a lot of the big companies. They run the mainstream media. If we are to succeed in making our country successful again, great again, whatever you want to call it, those people have to be taken on. And, I do see the Bitcoin community as part of that movement who are capable of taking these people on. I think there are other groups, farmers are pretty angry about what's going on. There are people who are, whether they're concerned about migration, whether they're concerned about free speech, there's a growing group of people who kind of understand that we've got a problem in this country. We've got a problem with the way the country's run. But that movement has to be focused, it has to be coordinated, and it has to understand what needs to change about Britain. And we just have a system problem. So if Nigel Farage did get elected in 2029 and the system isn't changed, if those things don't change, you will simply get more of the same. Because I have seen it, I saw it from the inside for 10 years. Prime ministers, chancellors did not have the capability to actually get things done.
Amazing. Just to wrap up, Liz, what's next for you? Another run at PM some stage?
Well, I tell you what, after what I've just said, I'm certainly not going to rush back into politics if the system hasn't changed, because I don't want to be the person being a spokesman for a system that doesn't work. Yeah. I'm focused on media. How do we create alternative media to take on the narrative? I think that's incredibly important. I'm very supportive of Bitcoin and alternatives to fiat currencies. I think we need to work more with our allies in other countries who want to change things. This isn't just a British problem. If you look at the Federal Reserve or the European Central Bank, it's the same problem across the world. So I want to help work with people who want to change things. That's what I want to do.
Lovely way to end it. Thanks very much for coming today, especially on your daughter's birthday. And thanks a lot.